Aragorn ruled for 122 years, but before he was the King of Gondor, he was a child living under a false name, hunted by the enemies of his bloodline. If he had been discovered, the line of Isildur would have ended forever. No king would have returned, no sword reforged, and Middle-earth might have fallen to Sauron's darkness. This is the untold story of Aragorn, from secret child to wandering ranger, from reluctant leader to the king who united the world. And if you stay until the end, you'll learn the truth about his reign, his death, and the legacy he left behind for the Fourth Age. Before we dive in, you might remember our episode about Gandalf and Aragorn's secret alliance, the years they spent hunting evil long before the War of the Ring. If you haven't seen it, it's in the description, and it's the perfect companion to this story. So let's go back to the very beginning, to a time when Aragorn was just a child called Estel, and the fate of Middle-earth was balanced on a knife's edge. Aragorn's story begins not with glory, but with tragedy. He was born in the wilds of Eriador in the year 2931 of the Third Age, the son of Arathorn II, chieftain of the Dunedain, and his wife, Gilraen. But before Aragorn was even 2 years old, his father was killed by orcs while hunting in the wild. This left Gilraen widowed, and her son the last living heir of Isildur, a bloodline that stretched back thousands of years. It was a dangerous inheritance. If Sauron's servants discovered the boy's existence, they would stop at nothing to end the line of kings forever. To keep him safe, Gilraen took Aragorn to Rivendell, the hidden valley of Elrond Half-Elven. There, Elrond welcomed him with open arms and agreed to raise him as one of his own sons. But to protect him, Elrond gave the boy a new name, Estel, which means hope. For nearly 20 years, Aragorn lived in Rivendell under this secret name. He was trained in wisdom, lore, and the skills of both elves and men. He grew tall, noble, and wise, never knowing the true weight he would one day bear. Then, when he came of age, Elrond revealed the truth. He told Aragorn of his lineage, that he was the heir of Isildur, the rightful lord of Arnor and Gondor. And with this revelation, Elrond gave him 2 things: the shards of Narsil, the sword that had cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, and the ring of Barahir, the ancient heirloom of his house. In that moment, Aragorn's childhood ended. He was no longer Estel, the boy of Rivendell. He was Aragorn, chieftain of the Dunedain, with the burden of an entire people on his shoulders. But instead of rushing to claim kingship, Aragorn chose a harder path. He left Rivendell and began the long years of wandering that would define his life, years in which he would walk the wild places of Middle-earth, serving in secret, waiting for the time when he would be ready to claim his throne. When Aragorn left Rivendell, he stepped into a world that had almost forgotten the Dunedain. But the blood of Númenor still ran strong in his veins, and his years of wandering would turn him from a hidden heir into a living legend. He became the chieftain of the Dunedain, leading the Rangers of the North in their lonely war to keep Eriador safe from orcs, trolls, and the servants of the enemy. Most of the free peoples never even knew they were being protected, but the Rangers' vigilance kept the Shire, Bree, and even the roads to Rivendell free from danger. Many called him simply Strider, never realizing that the man in the weather-stained cloak was the last hope of the line of kings. Aragorn's wanderings took him far beyond Eriador. He journeyed into Rohan, serving King Thengel with honor, learning the ways of the Riddermark and fighting against Dunlendings and orc raids. He traveled to Gondor, where he took the name Thorongil, Eagle of the Star, hiding his true identity even from the steward. As Thorongil, he became one of Gondor's greatest captains. He advised Steward Ecthelion II wisely, fought in Ithilien against Mordor's forces, and led a daring night raid against the corsairs of Umbar, burning their fleet and crippling their strength for years to come. But the politics of Gondor were complicated. Denethor, the steward's son, grew suspicious of Thorongil's growing fame, sensing that he was more than he appeared. Perhaps because of this, or perhaps because he knew his road led elsewhere, Aragorn departed suddenly. He left behind a single message of farewell, saying only that his path now took him to other lands and other duties. He did not go north immediately. Instead, he traveled into the east and south, into Harad, and perhaps even Rhûn. What he did there is left mostly untold, but Tolkien hints that Aragorn learned much about the enemies of the West, their languages, their strategies, and their hearts. During these years, Aragorn also met Gandalf the Grey, and the two formed a friendship that would shape the fate of Middle-earth. Together, they roamed far and wide, hunting the servants of Sauron and tracking Gollum through the wilderness. These were the hidden battles that weakened the enemy long before Frodo ever left the Shire. But despite all his deeds, Aragorn did not yet claim the throne that was his by right. He knew the world was not ready, and neither was he. These were the years of preparation, of service, hardship, and quiet heroism that forged Aragorn into the man who could one day stand before Sauron himself and not falter. And while he wandered, fate was weaving another thread into his story, a meeting that would change his life forever. It was during these years that Aragorn saw Arwen Undomiel again, and his heart was set on a destiny even greater than a crown. It was during his years of wandering that Aragorn saw Arwen Undomiel once more, and in that moment his path changed forever. He had met her briefly when he was still a boy in Rivendell, but now she was no longer just a distant vision. She was the Evenstar of her people, daughter of Elrond, and her beauty reminded all who saw her of Luthien Tinuviel, the most beloved of the First Age. For Aragorn, it was love at first sight, but with that love came a weight heavier than any sword. Elrond saw Aragorn's heart and spoke plainly. Arwen could not choose a mortal man unless Aragorn became king of both Gondor and Arnor. Only then would he prove worthy to claim her hand, for her choice would mean sacrificing the gift of immortality, the fate of her people tied to the fating of Middle-earth. This challenge became Aragorn's driving force. It was no longer only about reclaiming his throne. It was about becoming the man who could stand beside Arwen and give her a future worth forsaking the Undying Lands. Their love story was not one of ease or comfort. They were often separated for years as Aragorn roamed the wild and fought against the servants of Sauron. But their bond grew stronger, a quiet promise that sustained him in the darkest times. In many ways, Aragorn and Arwen's love mirrored the tale of Beren and Luthien, another mortal and elf, who defied fate to be together. And just like Beren, Aragorn would face impossible trials, confront death itself, and rise to fulfill a destiny greater than himself. By the time the shadow of Mordor reached its height, Aragorn was no longer just a wandering ranger. He had become a man ready to accept his birthright, and with it, the peril that came with standing against the Dark Lord. The War of the Ring was about to begin, and for Aragorn, it was not only a war for the fate of Middle-earth, but for the future of the woman he loved. When the shadow finally rose, Aragorn was ready. He was chosen to be part of the Fellowship of the Ring, 9 companions tasked with escorting Frodo and the One Ring to Mordor. At first, Aragorn was simply the protector, the ranger guiding them through the wilderness. But as danger closed in, his role changed. When Gandalf fell in Moria, Aragorn stepped forward as the leader, carrying the Fellowship onward despite their grief. Then came the breaking of the Fellowship. At Amon Hen, Boromir fell, defending Merry and Pippin. Aragorn found him in his final moments, and Boromir died in his arms, asking forgiveness. At that moment, Aragorn made a choice that defined him. He swore to protect the hobbits, to pursue their captors, and to stand as the new leader of the Fellowship. He pursued the orcs across the plains of Rohan, forging an alliance with King Theoden and winning the trust of the Rohirrim. At Helm's Deep, he fought side by side with Legolas and Gimli, rallying the defenders when all seemed lost. This was the first time Aragorn stood not as a hidden ranger, but as a captain before thousands. But he knew Gondor would soon face the full force of Mordor. Before riding to war, he visited the ancient shards of Narsil. They were reforged into Andúril, Flame of the West, a blazing symbol of the return of the king. With Andúril in his hand, Aragorn could no longer hide who he was. Then came one of his greatest trials. He looked into the Palantír, the Seeing Stone, and challenged Sauron himself. The risk was immense. Sauron could have crushed Aragorn's mind or revealed Frodo's mission, but Aragorn's will was unbroken. He revealed himself as the heir of Isildur, forcing Sauron to act hastily and set in motion the chain of events that would lead to the Dark Lord's downfall. And still, there was a darker road to tread. To save Gondor, Aragorn took the paths of the dead, a haunted road beneath the mountains where the Oathbreakers lingered in endless twilight. The dead men were a terror even to the bravest warriors, and many of Aragorn's followers feared to enter. But Aragorn's presence commanded their loyalty. He summoned the King of the Dead, calling him to fulfill the oath sworn to Isildur centuries ago. When the army of the dead followed Aragorn to Pelargir and swept through the corsairs of Umbar, terror broke Gondor's enemies before the swords were even raised. With Gondor saved and Rohan united, Aragorn led the hosts of the West to the very gates of Mordor. It was a desperate gamble, a final stand meant to distract Sauron long enough for Frodo to reach Mount Doom. Standing before the Black Gate, Aragorn faced the Dark Lord's armies with no guarantee of victory. But his courage gave hope to all who followed him. And when the ring was destroyed, Sauron's tower fell, and the world was freed from his shadow at last. This was the end of the Third Age, but for Aragorn, it was only the beginning, because now he would have to become the king he was born to be. With the fall of Sauron, The time of the king had come. Aragorn entered Minas Tirith not as a ranger, but as Elessar Telcontar, the long-awaited king of Gondor and Arnor. His coronation was a moment of renewal for all of Middle-earth. Faramir, now steward of Gondor, surrendered the rod of office, and Gandalf himself placed the crown upon Aragorn's head. The White Tree of Gondor blossomed once more, a sign that hope had truly returned. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the kingdoms of men were united. Aragorn's reign was not one of war, but of restoration. He rebuilt Minas Tirith, renewed the alliances of the West, and forged peace with the South and East, even with the Haradrim, bringing an end to generations of bloodshed. He restored the ancient realm of Arnor in the north, re-establishing Numenus as its capital, and placed governors and lords in the regions that had been leaderless for centuries. He also rewarded the smallest of heroes. Aragorn granted the Shire the status of free land, declaring that no big folk would enter it without the permission of the hobbits. This ensured that the peace Frodo and his companions fought for would last beyond their own lifetimes. And most importantly, Aragorn and Arwen were finally wed. Their union fulfilled the promise of their long love and symbolized the renewal of Númenórean blood. Together they had a son, Eldarion, and several daughters, securing the future of the reunited kingdom. Aragorn's reign lasted for 122 years, a time of growth and prosperity. But even kings of Númenórean blood cannot escape the gift of men. In the year 120 of the Fourth Age, Aragorn chose the time of his death, as was the privilege of his line. The scene was deeply moving. He laid down his crown and spoke to Arwen, reminding her that beyond the circles of the world, there is more than memory. He said farewell to his son and to his people, and passed quietly, leaving behind a world transformed by his wisdom and courage. Arwen's grief was deep, and she chose to leave Minas Tirith, traveling alone to Lorien. There she lived her final days beneath the fading trees, until she too passed beyond the circles of the world, bringing their story to its quiet, bittersweet end. Thus ended the tale of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Estel, Thorongil, Strider, and finally Elessar the king. So now you know the full story of Aragorn, the hidden heir who grew up as Estel, the wandering ranger who walked every corner of Middle-earth, the captain who fought in Gondor under a false name, the friend of Gandalf who hunted Sauron's servants, the leader who reforged Narsil into Andúril, and the king who ruled for 122 years. Aragorn's life is more than just the tale of a king. It is the story of hope, of a man who faced impossible odds and chose to rise again and again until the world was ready for the age of men. And maybe that is why his story endures. Because Aragorn reminds us that destiny isn't something you inherit. It's something you live every single day. If you enjoyed this journey through the life of the king, check out our episode about Gandalf and Aragorn's secret alliance. It's the perfect companion to this story, and it shows the battles they fought side by side long before the War of the Ring. The link is in the description. And if you want to uncover more hidden tales of Middle-earth, subscribe to Midnight Lorekeeper, because there are still so many secrets left to tell, and we're just getting started.